Murky, silent brushings of turquoise stripes flowed all over and among one another, smoothing the still rocks and plants of the sea floor into each other, until they became one of the everlasting ocean. Sand upon the bottom extending beyond one's sight into a distortment of greenish blue, burying every sunken object from the land above the rippling surface water. Partially submerged in this blatant rush of little tan rocks, stood a rusted metal figment from the upper world's making, at such an angle as to almost gaze up at the blurred home she once kept as her own. Still having a soul trapped within her ruined frames, she often thought of those days when her broken wheels whirred all day, while steam billowed from her funnel into a cool summer breeze. A breeze which was never to be felt again. The frigid, dimly lit ocean floor and slight hues of the shore only centimeters away from the water's top were all that was left to tell her soul she was still alive. Rotting away at the bottom of the ocean near to the dock, she slid off 5 years before after a frantic and scarring runaway that led to her final resting place. Never before had the craving for the flames of death been as clear as they were now. There was nothing else she desired to have more than to leave the world of dull months after dull years of uselessness and start anew in a different frame, ready to experience so much more than observing the slate-coloured fish that gave off so many reminders of the home and locomotives she missed so dearly. She had lost the majority of her shape and details due to weathering from the salt-filled waters filling up her boiler, causing many large holes to cover her remains, all of which were bordered with rust. The only spot unrusted was an algae-covered nameplate, faintly engraved to read Maura-Liath beneath, which was ever so slightly visible. Her once youthful face had been dissolved into nothing by the extensive pressure of water after she drowned, leaving her no way to cry aloud or shed a tear. She did so extensively low within her mind, so that her figurative tears would have raised the water even more. It may have risen even without her tears, as a striking scatter of red came flying out from the edge of the pier like a bullet slicing the water above. The little sunken engine gazed hopingly to the surface as a large crimson diesel engine tipped partially into the water, eyes filled with shock and pain as they stared deeply at the rusty remains laying on the ocean floor in panic, before an outer force pulled him back onto solid tracks from behind. This occurrence ended as soon as it started, and gave Maura-Liath something new to think about. She did know of diesels, the revolutionary new technology that had only just begun taking over before she was pulled beneath the waves. The tank engine had kept a strong grudge against them ever since then, figuring they were why she was left on the seabed in the first place. But she couldn't help but empathize with the pain of one's face being forced under, knowing he would certainly drown, just as she had. So seeing one now after 5 years have the same thing happen, yet survive to tell the tale, was relieving in a way, as she hadn't made contact with anything besides the silver fish up until then. Though Maura-Liath found his shape quite unfamiliar and obscure, she found that she recognized his eyes as not being those of a stranger. After being rescued, the diesel, whose name was Sinyad, also thought of the engine he saw beneath the waves. At first, he thought of her as being merely a mirage, considering his sights wasn't thought of as quite top-notch, and went on with his day, trying to convince himself that a fate of that sort was too horrid to be real. He found himself observing his sharp, definite surroundings between journeys and came across a thought. He had always been told of his eyesight was poor, and yet could see the world as clearly as crystal despite his half-closed right eye. So he figured that if there was even a chance that he saw a drowned engine trapped beneath the water, he'd check. What was to be done with an engine of her state was another matter. Restoring her to her previous state would be of no use, with her communication being non-existent, and usefulness in this land of no steam engines would have her in danger of a scrap, even if she were saved. There was only one way to put her out of pain and let her live a functional, joy-filled life. He didn't like it much, but he knew it was the only way. He set off for the harbour that night. The black and droomy look of the bay always left much to be desired from the delicate corpse of Maura-Liath, who thought of nothing but the end of her existence, just as she did most every evening before. This night, though, something was different. A slight beam of light pierced through the depths, shining directly upon her along with a hint of red tone to it. She didn't think much of it until a slight shimmering of metal bars came sinking to the sand surrounding her and pressed horizontal beams all around and slightly under her frames. The metal was attached to a contraption above the surface by a series of thick chains, and after a moment of realization, she figured out what it was. A crane. The half-dead Maura-Liath was being lifted. The sand caked along her side, loosening its grip as she rose from the ground, leaving only little bits of her wheels buried in the sand below. Ripples lengthened out as Maura-Liath emerged from the sea, as if she was coming back to life. She soared through the chilling frozen air, taking in the bright lights and the peaceful snow falling from the sky. A shot of pain came through her as the weight of the world finally shot down on her after the weightless water world left her body. Being manoeuvred slowly through the air brought shaking breezes through her frail, broken figure as she was placed on a flatbed with as much care as could be brought by the crane, considering the temperature. Directly in front of her was the same red diesel with those eyes she could just barely remember. "Dinna worry," he said kindly, before giving a breath of preparation. "You'll be able to rest now." His words were rather soothing, kind, and smooth through his Scottish accent, which she missed hearing so much from the mouths of others. The words he uttered, however, had struck her like a gong. She knew she'd heard those words before, but couldn't quite get where. She looked through the yards she once knew so well, now vacant of all coal hoppers and every last water tower. They were also full of resting diesels, scattered in new sheds around the yard, along with a completely new track layout. It was unsettling. Maura-Liath was soon brought along the new set of tracks to the only yard she had seen before. The smelter's yard. Looking back to the diesel, Maura-Liath noticed one of its eyes remained half closed throughout their journey, and found that this looked familiar. Then it came to her. The exact same look her sister, Sorka Craig, had in her eye while she was alive. The rusted engine's sister had been very sickly all throughout her life, and was partially blind in one eye because of it. This caused her appearance to be rather odd-looking. This Diesel had her sister's look in his eye, a look that brought back memories. She worked alongside Maura-Liath in the slate mines all her life before crashing, which only worsened her sight and look more. Sorka Craig took a while to adjust to her condition, but kept a positive attitude even during her hardest days. Maura-Liath had always admired her for this, though she also grew nervous for her sister's safety as her reliability lessened. She would often end up staying awake all night, trying to come up with a solution, to no avail. One night in January, 8 Januaries before the present night, Maura-Liath was ordered to visit the works, and saw Sorka Craig positioned atop a flatbed, her smile drained from her face. Hardly stable enough to look in her eyes, her sister somberly told her that she was being scrapped that day. Maura-Liath teared up, desperately trying to deny it, before her sister hushed her. Don't worry, you will be able to rest now," Sorka Craig told her sister, with tears in her eyes as she was brought by another engine into the smelter's shed. Maura-Liath barged in behind the engine and stared dumbfounded at Sorka Craig, who yelled, "Goodbye, my sister!" with her eyes watering as she disappeared into the flame. She never truly got over that day, but now it was her turn, and her very own sister, reincarnated and strong, was to put her to rest, just as the opposite was 9 years before. She'd already started tearing up in her mind from grief and joy all at once, and the same went for Sinead, who, despite not knowing their exact connection, felt very sad to see her go, and yet was relieved to know she'd suffer no more in this life. Maura-Liath was gripped by a crane and lifted above the furnace. With bittersweet tears in his eyes, Sinead saw a flickering image of her youthful, undamaged face within the sparks, and said, "Goodbye, my Maura-Liath," while through the sparks surrounding, the faint shape of Sorka Craig glistened within the shape of Sinead. Her soul glanced at her with tears before she responded, "Goodbye, my sister," within her mind and heart, which echoed throughout the world until Maura-Liath was no more.